Welcome to the Mixology Talk podcast. I'm Chris.
And I'm Julia, and we're the folks behind abarabove.com, the ultimate resource for craft bartenders, bar managers, and pretty much anybody else who's interested in making tasty drinks.
I'm a bar consultant with over 10 years of hospitality experience.
And I run abarabove.com, bringing great articles, podcasts like this one, and delicious recipes that I usually drink every week over on the blog.
This is episode number 119 of the Mixology Talk podcast. And this week, we are talking about a really cool ingredient that gets very little attention, gum syrup. So stay tuned.
So, gum syrup is something that you might have seen on old school recipes in like old books like Jerry Thomas and things like that. But what is it?
Yeah, so gum syrup is basically just a rich, simple syrup that has gum arabic. It's an emulsifier added to it. And the gum syrup actually does a couple things to the drink, to the syrup. The first thing, and I think it's probably the most coveted thing, is it creates this really cool silky texture on the palate. It's very different from regular simple syrup, and it just makes it a little bit more enjoyable of a drink. The other thing, and I think this is something that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it prevents sugar from crystallizing. So you can add even more syrup or more sugar to your syrup to make it even more punchy.
So do people use it when making, like as an ingredient in a cocktail, or do they use it as an ingredient in a syrup, which they use in a cocktail?
More along those lines. Yeah, they typically make a syrup out of it. So how it's typically made is imagine a 2-to-1 simple syrup where 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, and then gum, hydrated gum is added to it. So gum arabic acts very much like gelatin. You have to hydrate it, and the hydration portion could take hours. How this stuff usually comes is in a powder, but originally what gum syrup is, it's the sap from an acacia tree.
It's not the gum tree?
No, it's not. Well, they probably call it gum trees. So they're probably synonymous. And there's many different types of gum. There's like xanthan gum. I'm sure there's many other ones. But for the cocktail community, gum arabic or acacia gum is typically what we use. So yeah, that's how gum syrup is typically used behind the bar.
So is it something that was pretty common back in the day? Or, I mean, obviously it was available when folks like Jerry Thomas were writing their books. Yeah,
so gum syrup has gum arabic has a really long history. It's been used since the Egyptian times. I actually did a little bit of research, actually went down a research rabbit hole with this ingredient in preparation for this podcast. And it's one of the things I love about this industry is it's such a kind of a niche ingredient that we use behind the bar. Like not every bar uses gum syrup, but even that one specific little niche like gum arabic has such a long history to it, and it kind of weaves its tail through our industry a lot. And once you start to kind of put these points together, it's really super fascinating. And even up into modern times, it has a lot of weight behind it. So, for example, gum arabic was used as a ingredient in mummification for the ancient Egyptians. They use it for paper making. You use it in all kinds of different places, and it's even used in a lot of industry today.
I feel like you see it on a lot of ingredient labels. If you're looking for like gum arabic, like you see that a lot. You're not going to see like gum syrup, which is what you might see in a cocktail recipe.
Right.
But I think once you realize it's the same thing as gum arabic, it's like, well, that's everywhere.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So it's in pharmaceutical companies. It's in paints. It's in ink that they use for newspaper because it helps to bind everything to the paper. So the ink to the paper. They use it in pottery. They use it in all kinds of stuff. Baking, toothpaste, actually. So one of the other cool parts of this ingredient is that it is a probiotic, so it's included in toothpaste, for example, to help with tooth decay. So it creates this really cool film around like your tongue and your teeth and all that stuff, and it slows down attacking
stuff.
Right, exactly. So it helps prevent cavities and stuff like that. It's even used in fireworks as a binder.
Wow.
I know. So it's a really kind of ubiquitous ingredient that doesn't get a lot of attention, but it's even used in soda pop. This is one of the main things.
That's the one that I
used.
feel like I've heard about before.
Yeah, and it doesn't really get a lot of attention. Like, I think, if I remember correctly, if you read the back of like a Coke can or a Pepsi can, it's never really stated in the ingredients.
You do sometimes see gum arabic, but
Right.
yeah.
But even in like juices, they can use it in gum for gum arabic and stuff. But like I said, it's just using a bunch of stuff. The glue that's on the back of your stamp in envelopes, gum arabic
You
is
did a
part of
lot
that.
of research, didn't you?
Yeah, like I said, I went down this rabbit hole, and it's just a fascinating ingredient, and it has so many different impacts on our industry and kind of our economy. It's pretty amazing. So
why do we never see it in cocktails anymore?
yeah, I think it's one of those ingredients that just kind of became a little bit more on the industrial side. So people didn't really understand how to use it. And I think that going back to these older manuals, like the Jerry Thomas book, for example, people started to pick out ingredients that they've never heard of and try to figure out how to use it in cocktails. So I think we saw a resurgence of that when a speakeasy movement kind of started happening. They started bringing all these ingredients back. So it's really interesting, and like I said, it's a novel ingredient, and it makes a really interesting cocktail. For sure.
So when would you, like, if you're designing a cocktail, what would be a reason for you to be like, oh, I need to add gum arabic to this?
Yeah, so the typical rule of thumb is if you have a really booze-forward cocktail that has sugar, you would add gum arabic.
You were saying that, the quintessential old school cocktail that uses this is the old fashioned.
Right, exactly. So, like I said, super boozy, and you got some weight that it adds. The other thing that gum arabic does is very similar to like gelatin or egg whites or something, is it adds weight to the palate, but it also kind of mutes some of the flavors. So this is another good benefit of gum arabic is you have this boozy cocktail, all of a sudden it doesn't taste as boozy. So it kind of starts to chip off those hard edges that some cocktails can have.
But in a good way.
In a good way.
Right.
So yeah, this could be a really good way of utilizing it. You could use it with citrus, you could use it with anything. But typically how you see it is in a really booze-forward drink.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, I remember years and years ago, I think we made a video about it.
We did. Yeah, it was a long time ago.
It was, so I'll link to it, but it was in the early days of a bar above. So the video quality might be a little bit challenging, but I seem to recall, and I'm really trying to go off my memory here, which is dangerous, but I seem to recall that it comes in like a little packet, almost like gelatin powder.
Yeah,
and then you put it in water? Do you rehydrate in water?
Yeah, I believe the steps that I took was I mixed it with the sugar. So I kind of weighed everything out and got the proportions right, mix it with the sugar, and then add it to the simple syrup and just let it hydrate. Because like I said, it's a sap. It's super dense, so it takes a while for it to rehydrate. So yeah, that's, I believe, how I used it. Like I said, it's been a long time.
It's been a while. You might be better off just watching that video. We'll include that in the show notes, which will be mixologytalk.com/119.
Yeah, and like I said, this ingredient has had such a long history. This was one of the reasons that the French went into Africa.
Oh wow!
Gum arabic was a huge trade on the coast of Africa, and there was some positioning with the people that were trading, and they kept jacking the prices up, so the French went in there and then started their conquest of the interior of Africa because of this was kind of the catalyst of it. And typically how it's harvested is actually by nomadic tribes. So
even today?
Even today.
Back in the day?
No, even now.
Wow.
So nomadic tribes would wander the desert. There's two different kinds of gum arabic typically, and one of them just starts to release sap when it's wounded.
Just like oozes?
Yeah, oozes, and it comes out in these big giant nodules. And so they just come by and pick it up off the ground, and then they bring it to the market. Other people harvest this stuff by cutting the sap or the trees and harvesting the sap, and same thing, bringing it all to market. But yeah, it's a pretty fascinating ingredient. And the one thing that really caught my eye recently with how this applies to modern times is the majority of this product is harvested in Sudan, but also Somalia, and also a lot of those countries that have gone through some significant hardship over the years. But this there was a economic kind of blockade that we instituted right after 9/11 on Sudan, because Osama bin Laden was said to have owned a lot of these gum Arabic farms. So they wanted to kind of, so see, it had kind of like all sorts to kind of weave its...
When cocktails get political.
Yeah, and so then the person in charge of selling gum Arabic, I think it was only one company at that time, basically went in front of the U.S. Congress, surrounded himself with Coke products, and said, look, Coca-Cola products, not cocaine.
Just to be clear.
Because gum Arabic is kind of a white powder, so it's, when you buy it.
The other white powder.
Right, exactly. So he surrounded himself with like Coca-Cola and said, look, if you guys want to put an economic blockade on gum Arabic, that's fine, but that means that you don't get this product. And Coca-Cola didn't say anything, because it doesn't look great that you're getting products from this one specific war-torn, country. Yeah. So it's just kind of amazing how it's all kind of interweaved, and even now, it's starting to spread so that more harvesting is happening in different parts of Africa and stuff. But it's just really cool to see, like I said, how all this stuff is kind of tied, brought again to a modern setting, and then you just kind of realize like it's such an amazing world. Yeah, it really is pretty cool. So. Where can you buy, like, let's say somebody listens or watches this podcast and says, I gotta try this. I want to make an authentic old-fashioned cocktail the way they used to do it. Where do you get it? Yeah, so you can actually buy it on Amazon. We'll provide some links. And there's two different forms of gum Arabic. One is, and I'm going to have to double check this. We'll definitely include them in the show notes. But there's gum Senegal and there's gum Sayal. And they're totally different uses. I believe gum Sayal is used in pharmaceutical companies with those products, and gum Sayal is used more in the beverage side. Senegal, yes. Gum Senegal is used in beverage.
I would imagine you can probably find one on the one you find on Amazon is probably the one that's used in beverages.
I would assume so,
but
yeah.
You never know with Amazon.
Yeah, so we'll double check that and put them in the show notes.
We'll put the right one in the show notes.
Right, exactly.
The right white powder.
So yeah, that's kind of what you want to look out for. But, like I said, it makes a really great cocktail. And it's just a interesting ingredient to kind of dive down a rabbit hole in.
Yeah, absolutely. No, if you don't have access to this or you don't have the Amazon available to you or anything, and you want to kind of get the same result as adding gum syrup to your cocktails, do you have any suggestions for what?
Yeah,
other alternatives?
I've experimented using a little bit of gelatin, and that is a little bit different, but it creates a nice mouthfeel to it as well.
You do have to be careful with gelatin though, because it's not vegan. So if you're using gelatin in your cocktails, you may want to mention it on your menu in case people feel strongly about the use of those products.
Right, absolutely.
But gum Arabic is completely vegan, right?
Yeah.
I mean, comes from a tree.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's
you are injuring the tree to get it, though. So if you're like really, really strict, what is it like? Grounditarian, when you only eat things that fell on the floor? Shadowtarian. I don't eat shadows. Yeah,
I don't eat anything that casts a shadow. But yeah, you can. I'm sure you can find other things. Xanthan gum, I'm sure, can be utilized.
That makes sense.
Basically, any kind of gum.
Just basically read the ingredient label on candy. Read near the bottom, and you can probably try all that stuff.
Right, absolutely. But yeah, definitely. If you've tried it, or if you want to try it, I highly recommend it. And as Julie said, we'll include links to this gum Arabic in our show notes as well.
And do you think we can find a recipe for like an old school Manhattan using gum Arabic?
Maybe, yeah. Actually, I think we have a old fashioned that we use.
Oh, we might have done it on the
so
old
we'll
run.
Include that one in there. And how much you use in a mixture and all that stuff. We'll include some of that in the show notes.
We'll add that to the show notes then. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode all about gum Arabic. It's an interesting ingredient with an incredible history, and I think we were just kind of curious to talk about it and see if other folks out there are using it in your cocktails. If you are using it in your cocktails, definitely let us know how. I'd love to see your recipes and pictures and all that good stuff. You can leave those in the comments on the show notes at mixologytalk.com/119. And those show notes will also have a link to the correct product. We're not sure which one it is yet, but we will know then. A link to that old school video we did all about how to use gum Arabic in cocktails, how to make that syrup, how to hydrate it, all that good stuff. And of course, last but not least, we'll have that recipe for an old school, old fashioned, made the old fashioned way. An old fashioned made the old fashioned way.
Right.
As it should be. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Never miss an episode by subscribing in iTunes or YouTube. And as always, check out the show notes by clicking on the right.